How's it going? This is 3.5. This one is a short one, so we're only doing it in one day. This is the lesson for Wednesday's class. Okay, the first question. Actually, before we do that, I guess we should talk a little bit about what the theorem says. There's one main theorem that we're using here, which is called the Conjugate Theorem. And all it says is if I have a complex zero, remember complex numbers are of the form a plus bi. Here's a real number. This is some real number times I, so multiple of I. So if you have something like this, the conjugate zero theorem, says that a minus bi is also 0 if a plus bi is 0. And vice versa. If this is a 0, then its conjugate is back to the original, so that's also a 0. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of an actual question? Question number 1 asks us to find a polynomial that has degree 3, and it has those two zeros. But we really mean 3 zeros because using the conjugate theorem, if 1 minus I is a 0, its conjugate 1 plus I is also a 0. So now when I go to write that thing out, I do just like I did before. It's going to be, before meaning back in section 3.3 we did something like this. We're going to write out the factors x minus each of the zeros. X minus 2, x minus the second 0, which is 1 minus I, and x minus the third 0, which is 1 plus I. Now that's the original way that I write it out, but to make my multiplication easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get rid of these parentheses. Okay, so what that's going to look like is this. It's going to look like, this part stays the same, x minus 2. This part becomes x minus 1 minus I. This part is x minus 1 plus I. So if you look very carefully, what you should notice here is that you really have a difference of squares. This is x minus 1 minus I and x minus 1 plus I. Yeah, do you see that? So we have on the minus on one hand and plus on the other hand. So when I go to multiply this thing out, okay, first of all, x minus 2, this part stays the same. I'm sorry, this is an x that is a little ugly. Okay. This part I have x minus 1 squared, where the difference of squares says if I have a minus and a plus, it's the first part squared minus the second part squared. So minus I squared in this case. Yeah. But remember, I squared is just equal to -1, right? So I'm going to replace that with -1, then I'm going to multiply this thing out, and that's going to give me a new form of my answer. So it's going to be x minus 2 stays the same. This is x squared minus 2x plus 1. If you don't believe me, then just write it out 2 times, x minus 1, and multiply it out. Foil the thing. Minus, actually I need another parentheses here because this first piece is this whole thing in parentheses. X minus 1 squared is this part, and then minus I squared, which is minus a -1, or in other words plus 1. Yeah. The last thing to do now is just to simplify that thing. It's going to come out like this. X minus 2 stays the same. This is x squared minus 2x plus 1 plus another 1 is plus 2, like that. Yeah. Okay, I said the last part, but really there's one more stage because I can now multiply this x minus 2 by this resulting polynomial, x squared minus 2x plus 2. So I'm going to write that at the top and do the rest there. I did my multiplication in a slightly tricky way, like not tricky, but I utilized the fact that we have a difference of squares. If you don't want to do that, you could just do it by brute force and just multiply the thing out by foiling everything, but it's gonna take you longer. It's gonna be a little harder. Okay, so I'm just gonna copy down what I have there at the top. X minus 2, x squared minus 2x plus 2. Okay, all I'm doing is just copying down from the bottom to the top so I have more space to work. And then I just multiply this thing out, foil the thing. X times x squared, that's equal to x cubed. And x times -2x minus 2x squared, x times 2 is plus 2x. Now I'm going to move on to the negative 2. Negative 2 times x squared is negative 2x squared. Negative 2 times negative 2x is plus 4x. And negative 2 times 2 is negative 4. And finally, I just combine terms that are the same. So x squareds are both the same terms. Kind of types of terms are both x squareds. And x's are the same type. So I combine those. That gives me my final answer. X cubed minus 4x squared plus 6x minus 4. And there it is. That's a polynomial, and its zeros are 2, 1 minus I, and 1 plus I.